Vala, night the 7th. Then Urizen arose. The spectre fled, and Tharmas fled. The darkening spectre of Ruthona hid beneath a rock. Tharmas, through his impetuous flight through the deeps of immensity, revolving round in whirlpools fierce, all round the caverned worlds. But Urizen silent descended to the caves of Orc, and saw a caverned universe of flaming fire. The horses of Urizen, here bound to fiery mangers, furious dashed their golden hoofs, striking fierce sparkles from their brazen fetters. Fierce as lions howl in the burning dens, as tigers roam in the redounding smoke and forests of affliction. The adamantine scales of justice, consuming in the raging lamps of mercy, poured in rivers. The holy oil rages through all the caverned rocks. Fierce flames dance in the rivers and the rocks, howling and drunk with fury. The plow of ages and the golden harrow wade through fields of gory blood. The immortal seed is nourished for the slaughter. The bulls of Luva, breathing fire, bellow on burning pastures round howling Orc, whose awful limbs cast forth red smoke and fire. The Urizen approached not near, but took his seat on a rock, and ranged his books around him, brooding envious over Orc. Howling and rending his dark caves, the awful demon lay. Pulse after pulse beat on his fetters. Pulse after pulse his spirit darted and darted higher and higher to the shrine of Enetharman. As when the thunder folds himself in thickest clouds, the watery nations couch and hide in the profoundest deeps. Then bursting from his troubled head with terrible visages and flaming hair, his swift-winged daughters sweep across the vast black ocean. Lost felt the envy in his limbs, like to a blighted tree. For Urizen, fixed in envy, sat brooding and covered with snow. His book of iron on his knees, he traced the dreadful letters, while his snows fell and his storms beat to cool the flames of Orc, age after age, till underneath his heel a deadly root struck through the rock, the root of mystery accursed, shooting up branches into the heavens of loss. They pipe-formed, bending down, take root again whatsoever they touch, again branching forth in intricate labyrinths o'erspreading many a grisly deep. A maze started Urizen when he found himself compassed round and high-roofed over with trees. He arose, but the stems stood so thick he with difficulty and great pain brought his books out of the dismal shade, all but the book of iron. Again he took his seat and ranged his books around on the rock of iron, frowning over the foaming fires of Orc. Urizen hung over Orc and viewed his terrible wrath. Sitting upon an iron crag, at length his words broke forth. Image of dread, whence art thou? Whence is this most woeful place? Whence these fierce fires but from thyself? No other living thing in all this chasm I behold. No other living thing dare thy most terrible wrath abide. Bound here to waste and pain, the vital substance in these fires that issue new and new around thee, sometimes like a flood and sometimes like a rock of living pangs, thy horrible bed glowing with ceaseless fires beneath thee and around. Above a shower of fire now beats, molded to globes and arrowy wedges, rending thy bleeding limbs, and now a whirling pillar of burning sands to overwhelm thee, steeping thy wounds in salts infernal and in bitter anguish. And now a rock moves on the surface of this lake of fire, to bear thee down beneath the waves in stifling despair. Pity for thee moved me to break my dark and long repose, and to reveal myself before thee in a form of wisdom. Yet thou dost laugh at all these tortures in this horrible place. Yet throw thy limbs, thy fires abroad that back return upon thee, while thou reposest, throwing rage on rage, feeding thyself with visions of sweet bliss far other than this burning clime. Sure thou art bathed in rivers of delight, on verdant fields, walking in joy in bright expanses, sleeping on bright clouds with visions of delight so lovely that they urge thy rage tenfold with fierce desire to rend thy chain and howl in fury and deep oblivion of all woe in desperate repose. Or is thy joy founded on torment which others bear for thee? Orc answered, curse thy hoary brows. What dost thou in this deep? Thy pity I contemn, scatter thy snows elsewhere. I rage in the deep, for lo, my feet and hands are nailed to the burning rock. Yet my fierce fires are better than thy snows. Shuddering, thou sittest, thou art not chained. Why shouldst thou sit cold, groveling demon of woe, in tortures of dire coldness? Now a lake of waters deep sweeps over thee, freezing to solid. Still thou sitst closed up in that transparent rock, as if in joy of thy bright prison, till overburdened with its own weight, down through all immensity with a crash breaking across, the horrible mass comes down, thundering, and hail and frozen iron hailed from the element rends thy white hair. Yet thou dost sit obdurate, brooding still, writing thy books. Anon a cloud filled with a waste of snows covers thee, still obdurate, still resolved, in writing still, the rocks roll o'er thee, the floods pour, the winds black as the sea cut thee in gnashes, though the blood pours down around thy ankles, freezing thy feet to the hard rock. Still thy pen, obdurate, traces the wonders of futurity and horrible fear of the future. I rage furious in the deep, for lo, my hands and feet are nailed to the hard rock, or thou shouldst feel my enmity and hate, in all the diseases of man falling upon thy gray accursed front. Urizen answered, read my books, explore my constellations, inquire of my sons, and they shall teach thee how to war. Inquire my daughters, who accursed in the dark depths need bread of sorrow by my stern command, for I am God of all this dreadful ruin. Rise, O daughters, at my stern command. Rending the rocks, Eleth and Uveth rose, and Ona rose, terrific, with the iron wheels driving them across in the dim air. They took the book of iron and placed above on clouds of death, and sang their songs, needing the breath of Orc. Orc listened to the song compelled, hungering on the cold wind that swagged heavy with the accursed dough. The hoarfrost raged through Ona's sieve. The torrent rain poured from the iron pail of Eleth, and the icy hands of Uveth kneaded the bread. The heavens bow with terror underneath their iron hands, singing at their dire work the words of Urizen's book of iron, while the enormous scrolls rolled dreadful in the heavens above, and still the burden of their song and tears was poured forth. The bread is kneaded. Let us rest, O cruel father of children. But Urizen remitted not their labors upon his rock, and Urizen read in his book of brass in sounding tones. Listen, O daughters, to my voice. Listen to the words of wisdom. So shall ye govern all. Let moral duty tune your tongue, but let your hearts be harder than the nether millstone, to bring the shadow of Enetharmon beneath our wondrous tree, that loss may evaporate like smoke and be no more. Draw down Enetharmon to the specter of Urthona. Let him have dominion over loss, the terrible shade. Compel the poor to live upon a crust of bread by soft, mild arts. Smile when they frown, frown when they smile, and when a man looks pale with labor and abstinence, say he looks healthy and happy. And when his children sicken, let them die. There are enough born, even too many, and our earth will be overrun without these arts. If you would make the poor live with temper, with pomp, give every crust of bread you give. With gracious cunning, magnify small gifts. Reduce the man to want a gift, and then give with pomp. Say he smiles if you hear him sigh. If pale, say he is ruddy. Preach temperance. Say he is overgorged and drowns his wit in strong drink, though you know that bread and water are all he can afford. Flatter his wife. Pity his children, till we can reduce all to our will, as spaniels are taught with art. Lo, how the heart and brain are formed in the breeding womb of Enetharmon. How it buds with life and forms the bones, the little heart, the liver, and the red blood in its labyrinths by gratified desire. By strong devouring appetite she fills loss with ambitious fury, that his race shall all devour. Then Orc cried, curse thy cold hypocrisy. Already round thy tree, in scales that shine with gold and rubies, thou beginnest to weaken my divided spirit. Like a worm, I rise in peace, unbound from wrath. Now, when I rage, my fetters bind me more. Torment, torment, a worm compelled. Am I a worm? Is it in strong deceit that man is born? In strong deceit thou dost restrain my fury, that the worm may fold the tree. Avaunt, cold hypocrite, I am chained, or thou couldst not use me thus. The man shall rage bound with this chain, the worm in silence creep. Thou wilt not cease from rage, grey demon. Silence all thy storms. Give me example of thy mildness, king of furious hailstorms. Art thou the cold attractive power that holds me in this chain? I well remember how I stole thy light, and it became fire consuming. Thou knowest me now, O Urizen, Prince of Light, and I know thee. Is this the triumph, this the godlike state that lies beyond the bounds of science in the gray obscure? Terrified, Urizen heard Orc, now certain he was Luva, and Orc began to organize a serpent body, despising Urizen's light and turning it into flaming fire, receiving as a poisoned cup receives the heavenly wine, and turning affection into fury and thought into abstraction, a self-consuming dark devourer rising into the heavens. Urizen envious brooding sat, and saw the secret terror flame high in pride, and laughed to scorn the source of his deceit, nor knew the source of his own, but thought himself the sole author of all his wandering experiments in the horrible abyss. He knew that weakness stretches out in breadth and length. He knew that wisdom reaches high and deep, and therefore he made Orc in serpent form, compelled, stretch out and up the mysterious tree. He suffered him to climb that he might draw all human forms into submission to his will, nor knew the dread result. Lost sat in showers of Urizen, watching cold Enitharmon. His broodings rushed down to his feet, producing eggs that hatching burst forth upon the winds above the tree of mystery. Enitharmon lay on his knees. Urizen traced his verses in the dark deep. The dark tree grew. Her shadow was drawn down to the roots. It wept over Orc, the shadow of Enitharmon. Lost stars stretched, the image of death upon his withered valleys. Her shadow went forth and returned. Now she was pale as snow when the mountains and hills are covered over and the paths of men shut up. But when her spirit returned, as ruddy as a morning when the ripe fruit blushes into joy in heaven's eternal halls, sorrow shot through him from his feet. It shot up to his head like a cold night that nips the root and shatters all the leaves. Silent he stood over Enitharmon, watching her pale face. He spoke not. He was silent till he felt the cold disease. Then Was mourned on the dismal wind in his jealous lamentation. Why can I not enjoy thy beauty, lovely Enitharmon, when I return from clouds of grief in the wandering elements, where thou in thrilling joy and beaming summer loveliness delectable reposest ruddy in my absence, flaming with beauty, cold, pale, and sorrow at my approach, trembling at my terrific forehead and eyes, thy lips decay like roses in the spring. How art thou shrunk like grapes that burst in summer's vast excess, shut up in little purple covering, faintly bud and die. Thy olive trees that poured down oil upon 1,000 hills, sickly looked forth and scarcely stretched the branches to the plain. Thy roses that expanded in the face of glowing morn, hid in a little silken veil, scarce breathe and faintly shine. Thy lilies that gave light what time the morning looked forth, hid in the veils, faintly lament, and no one hears their voice. All things beside the woeful loss enjoy the delights of beauty. Once how I sang and called the beasts and birds to their delights, nor knew that I alone, exempted from the joys of love, must war with secret monsters of the animating worlds. Oh, that I had not seen the day, then should I be at rest, nor felt the stingings of desire, nor longings after life, for life is sweet to loss. The wretched to his winged woes is given a cravening cry, that they may sit at night on barren rocks and wet their beaks and snuff the air and watch the opening dawn and shriek till at the smells of blood they stretch their bony wings and cut the winds like arrows shot by troops of destiny. Thus a loss lamented in the night, unheard by Enitharmon, for the shadow of Enitharmon descended down the tree of mystery. The spectre saw the shade shivering over his gloomy rocks beneath the tree of mystery, which in the dismal abyss began to blossom, in fierce pain shooting its writhing buds in throes of birth. And now the blossoms falling, shining forth, appeared of many colors and many poisonous qualities of plagues hidden in shining globes that grew on the living tree. The spectre of Urthona saw the shadow of Enitharmon beneath the tree of mystery among the leaves and fruit. Reddening the demon strong, prepared the poison of sweet love. He turned from side to side in tears. He wept and he embraced the fleeting image, and in whispers mild wooed the faint shade. Loveliest delight of men, Enitharmon, shady, hiding in secret places where no man can trace thy watery way. Have I found thee? Have I found thee? Tremblest thou in fear because of Orc, because he rent his discordant way from thy sweet loins of bliss? Red flowed thy blood, pale grew thy face, lightnings played around thee, thunders hovered over thee, and the terrible Orc rent his discordant way. But the next joy of thine shall be in sweet delusion, and its birth in fainting and sleep, and sweet delusions of Vala. The shadow of Enitharmon answered, Art thou, terrible shade, set over this sweet boy of mine, to guard him, lest he rend his mother to the winds of heaven, intoxicated with the fruit of this delightful tree? I cannot flee away from thy embrace, else be assured so horrible a form should never in my arms repose. Now listen, I will tell thee secrets of eternity which never before unlocked my golden lips, nor took the bar from Enitharmon's breast. Among the flowers of Beulah walked the eternal man, and saw Vala, the lily of the desert, melting in high noon. Upon her bosom in sweet bliss he fainted. Wonder seized all heaven, they saw him dark. They built a golden wall around Beulah. There he reveled in delight among the flowers. Vala was pregnant and brought forth Urizen, Prince of Light, firstborn of generation. And behold, a wonder to the eyes of the now fallen man, a double form Vala appeared, a male and female. Shuddering pale, the fallen man recoiled from the enormity, and he called them Luva and Vala, turning down the veils to find his way back into heaven, but found none, for his frail eyes were faded, and his eyes heavy and dull. Urizen grew up in the plains of Beulah. Many sons and many daughters flourished round the holy tent of man, till he forgot eternity delighted in his sweet joy, among his family, his flocks and herds, and tents and pastures. Beluva close conferred with Urizen in darksome night to bind the father and enslave the brethren. Naught he knew of sweet eternity. The blood flowed round the holy tent, and riven from its hinges, uttering its final groan, all Beulah fell in dark confusion. Meantime Los was born, and Enitharmon, but how I know not. Then forgetfulness quite wrapped me up a period, nor do I more remember till I stood beside Los in the cavern, dark enslaved to vegetative forms, according to the will of Luva, who assumed the place of the eternal man and smote him. But thou, spectre dark, mayest find a way to punish Vala in thy fiery south, to bring her down subjected to the rage of my fierce boy. The spectre said, Thou lovely vision, this delightful tree is given us for a shelter from the tempests of void and solid, till once again the morn of ages shall renew upon us, to reunite in those mild fields of happy eternity where thou and I in undivided essence walked about embodied. Thou my garden of delight, and I the spirit in the garden. Mutual, there we dwelt in one another's joy, revolving days of eternity with Tharmas mild and Luva sweet melodious upon our waters. This thou well rememberest. Listen, I will tell what thou forgettest. They in us and we in them, alternate, live, drinking the joys of universal manhood. One dread morn, listen, O vision of delight. One dread morn of gory blood, the manhood was divided, for the gentle passions making way through the infinite labyrinths of the heart, and through the nostrils issuing in odorous stupefaction, stood before the eyes of man a female bright. I stood beside my anvil dark. A mass of iron glowed bright, prepared for spades and plowshares. Sudden down I sunk with cries of blood issuing downward in the veins which now my rivers were become, rolling in tube-like forms, shut up within themselves, descending down I sunk along the gory tide, even to the place of seed, and there dividing I was divided in darkness and oblivion. Thou an infant woe, and I an infant terror, in the womb of Enia, and my masculine spirit scorning, the frail body issued forth from Enian's brain. In this deformed form, leaving thee there till times passed over thee, but still my spirit returning hovered, and formed a male to be the counterpart to thee, O love, darkened and lost. In due time, issuing forth from Enian's womb, thou and that demon lost were born. And jealousy and woe. Poor, divided, dark Urthona, now a spectre, wandering the deeps of loss, the slave of that creation I created. I labor night and day for loss, but listen thou my vision. I view futurity in thee. I will bring down soft Vala to the embraces of this terror, and I will destroy that body I created. Then shall we unite again in bliss. Thou knowest that the spectre is in every man, insane, brutish, deformed, that I am thus a ravening, devouring lust, continually craving and devouring. But my eyes are always upon thee, O lovely delusion, and I cannot crave for anything but thee. Not so the spectres of the dead, for I am as the spectre of the living. For till these terrors planted round the gates of eternal life are driven away and annihilated, we never can repass the gates. Astonished, filled with tears, the spirit of Enitharmon beheld and heard the spectre. Bitterly she wept, embracing fervent her once loved lord, now but a shade, herself also a shade, conferring times on times among the branches of that tree. Thus they conferred among the intoxicating fumes of mystery, till Enitharmon's shadow, pregnant in the deeps beneath, brought forth a wonder horrible. While Enitharmon shrieked and trembled through the worlds above, Los wept. His fierce soul was terrified at the shrieks of Enitharmon, at her tossings, nor could his eyes perceive the cause of her dire anguish, for she lay, the image of death, moved by strong shudders till her shadow was delivered. Then she ran raving about the upper elements in maddening fury. She burst the gates of Enitharmon's heart with direful crash, nor could they ever be closed again. The golden hinges were broken, and the gates broken sunder, and their ornaments defaced beneath the tree of mystery. For the immortal shadow, shuddering, brought forth this wonder horrible. A cloud, she grew and grew, till many of the dead burst forth from the bottoms of their tombs in male forms, without female counterparts or emanations, cruel and ravening with enmity and hatred and war, in dreams of Ulro, dark, delusive, drawn by the lovely shadow. The spectre, terrified, gave her charge over the howling orc, but in the deeps beneath the roots of mystery in darkest night where Urizen sat on his rock, the shadow brooded. Urizen saw and triumphed, and he cried to his warriors, "The time of prophecy is now revolved, and all this universal ornament is mine, and in my hands the ends of heaven. Like a garment will I fold them round me, consuming what must be consumed. Then in power and majesty I will walk forth through those wild fields of endless eternity, a god and not a man, a conqueror in triumphant glory, and all the sons of everlasting shall bow down at my feet. First trades and commerce, ships and armed vessels he builded laborious to swim the deep, and on the land children are sold to trades of dire necessity, still laboring day and night till all their life extinct they took the spectre form in dark despair. And slaves in myriads and shiploads burden the hoarse-sounding deep, rattling with clanking chains. The universal empire groans. And he commanded his sons found a center in the deep. And Urizen laid the first stone, and all his myriads builded a temple in the image of the human heart. And in the inner part of the temple, wondrous workmanship, they formed the secret place, reversing all the order of delight, that whosoever entered into the temple might not behold the hidden wonders allegoric of the generations of secret lust, when hidden chambers dark the nightly harlot plays in disguise, and whispered hymn and mumbling prayer. The priests he ordained, and priestesses clothed in disguise bestial, inspiring secrecy, and lamps they bore, intoxicating fumes roll round the temple, and they took the sun that glowed o'er loss, and with immense machines down rolling, the terrific orb compelled. The sun, reddening like a fierce lion in his chains, descended to the sounds of instruments that drowned the noise of the horse wheels and the terrific howlings of wild beasts that dragged the wheels of the sun's chariot. And they put the sun into the temple of Urizen to give light to the abyss, to light the war by day, to hide his secret beams by night. For he divided day and night in different ordered portions, the day for war, the night for secret religion in his temple. Los reared his mighty stature. On earth stood his feet, above the moon, his furious forehead circled with black bursting thunders, his naked limbs glittering upon the dark blue sky, his knees bathed in bloody clouds, his loins in fires of war, where spears and swords rage, where the eagles cry and the vultures laugh, saying, "Now comes the night of carnage, now the flesh of kings and princes pampered in palace for our food, the blood of captains nurtured with lust and murder for our drink. The drunken raven shall wander all night among the slain, and mock the wounded that groan in the field." Tharmas laughed furious among the banners clothed in blood, crying, "As I will, I rend the nations all asunder, rending the people, vain their combinations, I will scatter them. But thou, O son, whom I have crowned and enthroned, thee strong I will preserve, though enemies arise around thee numberless. I will command my winds, and they shall scatter them, or call my waters like a flood around thee. Fear not, trust in me, and I will give thee all the ends of heaven for thy possession. In war thou shalt bear rule, in blood shalt thou triumph for me, because in times of everlasting I was rent in sunder. What I loved best was divided among my enemies. My little daughters were made captives, and I saw them beaten with whips along the sultry sands. I heard those whom I loved crying in secret tents at night, and in the morn compelled to labor. And behold, my heart sunk down beneath in sighs and sobbings, all dividing, till I was divided in twain. And lo, my crystal form that lived in my bosom followed her daughters to the fields of blood. They left me naked alone, and they refused to return from the fields of the mighty. Therefore I will reward them as they have rewarded me. I will divide them in my anger, and thou, O my king, shalt gather them from out their graves, and put thy fetter on them, and bind them to thee, that my crystal form may come to me. So cried the demon of the waters in the clouds of loss. Outstretched upon the hills lay Enitharmon. Clouds and tempests beat round her head all night. All day she riots in excess. But night or day loss follows. War and the dismal moon rolls over her. That when loss warred upon the south, reflected the fierce fires of his immortal head into the north upon faint Enitharmon. Red raged the furies of fierce Orc. Black thunders roll round Los, flaming his head like the bright sun seen through a mist that magnifies his disk into a terrible vision to the eyes of trembling mortals. And Enitharmon, trembling and in fear, uttered these words: I put not any trust in thee, nor in thy glittering scales. Thy eyelids are a terror to me, and the flaming of thy crest. The rushing of thy scales confound me, thy horse-rushing scales. And if that loss had not built me a tower upon a rock, I must have died in the dark desert among noxious worms. How shall I flee? How shall I flee into the tower of loss? My feet are turned backward, and my footsteps slide in clay, and clouds are closed around my tower. My arms labor in vain. Does not the God of waters and the racking element love those who hate, rewarding with hate the loving soul? And must I not obey the God, thou shadow of jealousy? I cry, the watchman heareth not. I pour my voice in roarings. Watchman, the night is thick, and darkness cheats my raised sight. Lift up, O loss, awake my watchman, for he sleepeth. Lift up, shine forth, O light. Watchman, thy light is out. O loss, unless thou can keep my tower, the watchman will be slain. So Enitharmon cried upon her terrible earthy bed, while the broad oak wreathed his roots round her, forcing his dark way through caves of death into existence. The beech, long-limbed, advanced terrific into the pained heavens. The fruit trees, humanizing, showed their immortal energies in warlike desperation, rending the heavens and earths and drinking blood in the hot battle to feed their fruit, to gratify their hidden sons and daughters that far within the close recesses of their secret palaces viewed the vast war and joyed, wishing to vegetate into the worlds of Enitharmon. Loud the roaring winds, burdened with clouds, howl round the couch. Sullen the woolen sheep walks through the battle dark, and fierce the bull, his rage propagates through the warring earth. The lion raging in flames, the tiger in redounding smoke, the serpent of the woods and of the waters and the scorpion of the desert irritate with harsh songs every living soul. The Prester serpent runs along the ranks, crying, "Listen to the priest of God, ye warriors! This cowl upon my head he placed in times of everlasting, and said, Go forth and guide my battles like the jointed spine of man. I made thee when I blotted man from life and light. Take thou the 7 diseases of man, store them for times to come in storehouses and secret places that I will tell thee of to be my great and awful curses at the time appointed." The Prester serpent ceased. The war song sounded loud and strong through all the heavens. Urizen's web vibrated, torment on torment. Thus, in the caverns of the grave and places of human seed, the nameless, shadowy vortex stood before the face of Orc. The shadow reared her dismal head over the flaming youth with sighs and howling and deep sobs, that he might lose his rage and with it lose himself in meekness. She embraced his fire. As when the earthquake rouses from his den, his shoulders huge appear above the crumbling mountain. Silence waits around him a moment, then astounding horror belches from the center. The fiery dogs arise, the shoulders huge appear. So Orc rolled round his clouds upon the deeps of dark Urthona, knowing the arts of Urizen were pity and meek affection, and that by these arts the serpent form exuded from his limbs, silent as despairing love and strong as jealousy. Jealous that she was Vala, now become Urizen's harlot, and the harlot of loss, and the deluded harlot of the kings of earth. His soul was gnawn in sunder. The hairy shoulders rend the links, free are the wrists of fire. Red rage redounds, he rouses his lions from his forest black. They howl round the flaming youth, rending the nameless shadow, and running their immortal course through solid darkness born. Loud sounds the war song round Red Orc in his triumphant fury, and round the nameless shadowy female in her howling terror as when all elemental gods joined in the wondrous song. Sound the war trumpet terrific, souls clad in attractive steel, sound the shrill fife, serpents of war. I hear the northern drum awake, I hear the flapping of the folding banners. The dragons in the north put on their armor. Upon the eastern sea direct they take their course. The glittering of their horses' trappings stains the vault of night. Stop we the rising of the glorious king? Spur, spur your clouds of death. O northern drum, awake. O hand of iron, sound the northern drum. Now give the charge, bravely obscured with darts of wintry hail. Again the black bow draw. Again the elemental strings to your right breast draw, and let the thundering drums speed on the arrows black. The arrows flew from cloudy bow all day, till blood from east to west flowed like the human veins in rivers of life upon the plains of death and valleys of despair. Now sound the clarions of victory. Now strip the slain. Clothe yourself in golden arms, brothers of war. They sound the clarions strong. They chain the howling captives. They give the oath of blood. They cast the lots into the helmet. They vote the death of Luva, and they nailed him to the tree. They pierced him with a spear and laid him in a sepulchre to die a death of 6,000 years bound round with desolation. The sun was black, and the moon rolled a useless globe through heaven. Then left the sons of Urizen the plow and harrow, the loom, the hammer, and the chisel, and the rule and compasses. They forged the sword, the chariot of war, the battle axe, the trumpet fitted to the battle, and the flute of summer, and all the arts of life they changed into the arts of death. The hourglass contend because its simple workmanship was as the workmanship of the plowman, and the water wheel that raises water into cisterns, broken and burned in fire because its workmanship was like the workmanship of the shepherd. And in their stead intricate wheels invented, wheel without wheel, to perplex youth in their outgoings, and to bind to labors of day and night the myriads of eternity, that they might file and polish brass and iron, hour after hour, laborious workmanship, kept ignorant of the use, that they might spend the days of wisdom in sorrowful drudgery, to obtain a scanty pittance of bread, in ignorance to view the portion and think that all, and call it demonstration, blind to all the simple rules of life. Now, the battle rages round thy tender limbs, O Vala. Now smile among thy bitter tears. Now put on all thy beauty. Is not the wound of the sword sweet, and the broken bone delightful? Wilt thou now smile among the slain, when the wounded groan in the field? Lift up thy blue eyes, Vala, and put on thy sapphire shoes. O melancholy Magdalene, behold, the morning breaks. Gird on thy flaming zone, descend into the sepulchre. Scatter the blood from thy golden brow, the tears from thy silver locks. Shake off the waters from thy wings and the dust of thy white garments. Remember all thy fainted terrors on the secret couch, when the sun rose in glowing morn with the arms of mighty hosts marching to battle, who is wont to rise with Urizen's harps, girt as a sower with his seed to scatter life abroad. Arise, O Vala, bring the bow of Urizen, bring the swift arrows of light. How raged the golden horses of Urizen, bound to the chariot of love, compelled to leave the plow to the ox, to snuff up the winds of desolation, to trample the cornfields in boastful neighings. This is no gentle harp, this is no warbling brook, nor shadow of a myrtle tree, but blood and wounds and dismal cries and clarions of war, and hearts laid open to the light by the broad grisly sword, and bowels hidden in hammered steel ripped forth upon the ground. Call forth thy smiles of soft deceit. Call forth thy cloudy tears. We hear thy sighs and trumpets shrill when morn shall blood renew. So sung the demons of the deep. The clarions of war blew loud. Orc Renter in his human form consumed in his own fires, mingling with her dolorous members strewn through the abyss. She joyed in all the conflict, gratified in drinking tears of woe. No more remained of Orc, but the serpent round the tree of mystery. The form of Orc was gone. He reared his serpent bulk among the stars of Urizen, in power rending the form of life into a formless indefinite, and strewing her on the abyss like clouds upon the wintry sky, broken with winds and thunders. This was to her supreme delight. The warriors mourn, though disappointed. They go out to war with strong shouts and loud clarions. No pity, they return with lamentations, mourning and weeping. Invisible or visible, drawn out in length or stretched in breadth, the shadowy female varied in the war. In her delight, howling in discontent, black and heavy, uttering brute sounds, wading through fens among the slimy weeds, making lamentations to deceive Tharmas in his rage, to soothe his furious soul, to stay him in his flight that Urizen might live, though in pain. He said, "Art thou bright Ennian? Is the shadow of hope returned?" And she said, "Tharmas, I am Vala. Bless thy innocent face. Doth Ennian avoid the sight of thy blue watery eyes? Be not persuaded that the air knows this, or the falling dew." Tharmas replied, "O Vala, once I lived in a garden of delight. I wakened Ennian in the morning, and she turned away among the apple trees, and all the gardens of delight swam like a dream before my eyes. I went to seek the steps of Ennian in the gardens, and the shadows compassed me and closed me in a watery world of woe, where Ennian stood trembling before me like a shadow, like mist, like air. And she is gone, and here alone I war with darkness and death. I hear thy voice, but see not thy form. Thou in all delight and life appear and vanish, mocking me with shadows of false hope. Hast thou forgot that the air listens through all its districts, telling the subtlest thoughts shut up from light in chambers of the moon? Tharmas, the moon has chambers where the babes of love lie hid, and whence they never can be brought in all eternity unless exposed by their vain parents. Lo, him who I love is hidden from me, and I never in all eternity shall see him. And Atharman and Ahania, combined with Ennian, hid him in that outrageous form of orc, which torments me for sin, for all my secret thoughts, which he brings forth upon the light of day in jealousy and blood. My children are led to Urizen's war before my eyes, and for every one of these I am condemned to eternal torment in these flames. For though I have the power to rise on high, yet love here binds me down, and never, never will I arise till him I love is loosed from this dark chain." Tharmas replied, "Vala, thy sins have cost us heaven and bliss. Thou art our curse. Until I can bring love into the light, I never will depart from my great wrath." So Tharmas wailed wrathful, then rode the stormy deep, cursing the voice that mocked him with false hope, in furious mood. Then she returned swift as a blight upon the infant bud, howling in all the notes of woe to stay his furious rage, stamping the hills, wading or swimming, flying furious or falling, or like an earthquake rumbling in the bowels of the earth, or like a cloud beneath, or like a fire flaming in high, walking in pleasure of the hills, or murmuring in the dales, like to a rushing torrent beneath, and a falling rock above, a thundercloud in the south, and a lulling voice heard in the north. And she went forth and saw the forms of light and of delight, walking on mountains or flying in the open expanse of heaven. She heard sweet voices in the winds and in the voices of birds that rose from waters. For the waters were as the voice of Luva, not seen to her like waters or like this dark world of death. Though all those fair perfections which men know only by name in beautiful substantial forms appeared and served her as food or drink or ornament, or in delightful works to build her bowers, for the elements brought forth abundantly the living soul in glorious forms, and every one came forth walking before her shadowy face and bowing at her feet. But in vain delights were poured forth in the howling melancholy. For her delight the horse his proud neck bowed in his white mane, and the strong lion deigned in his mouth to wear the golden bit, while the far-beaming peacock waited on the fragrant wind to bring her fruits of sweet delight from trees of richest wonders, and the strong-pinioned eagle bore the fire of heaven in the night season. Wooed and subdued into eternal death, the demon lay in rage against the dark despair, the howling melancholy. For far and wide she stretched through all the worlds of Urizen's journey, and was adjoined to Beulah as the polypus to the rock. Mourning the daughters of Beulah saw, nor could they have sustained the horrid sight of death and torment, but the eternal promise they wrote on all their tombs and pillars, and on every urn these words: If you will believe, your brother shall rise again. In golden letters ornamented with sweet labors of love, waiting with patience for the fulfillment of the promise divine. And all the songs of Beulah sounded comfortable notes, not suffering doubt to rise up from the clouds of the shadowy female. Then myriads of the dead burst through the bottoms of their tombs, descending on the shadowy female's clouds in spectrous terror, beyond the limit of translucence on the lake of Udan-Adan. These they named Satans, and in the aggregate they named them Satan. Then took the tree of mystery root in the world of loss, its topmost boughs shooting a fiber beneath Enitharmon's couch. The double-rooted labyrinth soon waved around their heads. But then the spectre entered Los's bosom. Every sigh and groan of Enitharmon bore Urthona's spectre on its wings. Obdurate Los felt pity. Enitharmon told the tale of Urthona. Los embraced the spectre first as a brother, then as another self, astonished, humanizing, and in tears of self-abasement, giving up his domineering lust. Thou canst never embrace sweet Enitharmon, terrible demon, till thou art united with thy spectre, consummating by pains and labors that mortal body, and by self-annihilation back returning to life eternal. Be assured I am thy real self, though thus divided from thee, and the slave of every passion of thy fierce soul. Unbar the gates of memory. Look upon me, not as another, but as thy real self. I am thy spectre. Thou didst subdue me in old times by thy immortal strength, when I was a ravening, hungering, and thirsting, cruel lust and murder, though horrible and ghastly to thine eyes, though buried beneath the ruins of the universe. Hear what inspired I speak, and be silent. If we unite in one, another better world will be open within your heart and loins and wondrous brain, threefold as it was in eternity. And this, the fourth universe, will be renewed by the three and consummated in mental fires. But if thou dost refuse, another body will be prepared for me, and thou annihilate, evaporate, and be no more. For thou art but a form and organ of life, and of thyself art nothing, being created continually by mercy and love divine. Los furious answered, Spectre horrible, thy words astound my ear with irresistible conviction. I feel I am not one of those who, when convinced, can still persist, though furious, controllable by reason's power. Even I already feel a world within opening its gates, and in it all the real substances of which these in the outward world are shadows which pass away. Come into my bosom, and in thy shadowy arms bring with thee my sweet Enitharmon. I will quench my fury and teach peace to the soul of dark revenge, and repentance to cruelty. So spoke Los, and embracing Enitharmon in the spectre. Clouds would have folded round in ecstasy and love uniting, but Enitharmon trembling fled and hid beneath Urizen's tree. But mingling together with his spectre, the spectre of Urthona wondering beheld the center opened by divine mercy inspired. He in his turn gave tasks to Los, enormous, to destroy that body he created, but in vain, for Los performed wonders of labor. They builded Gulganuza. Los, laboring, builded pillars high and domes terrific in the nether heavens, for beneath was open new heavens and a new earth, beneath and within, threefold within the brain, within the heart, within the loins, a threefold atmosphere, sublime, continuous from Urthona's world, but having yet a limit twofold, named Satan and Adam. The Los stood on the limit of translucence, weeping, and trembling, filled with doubts and self-accusation, beheld the fruit of Urizen's mysterious tree. For Enitharmon thus spake, When in the depths beneath I gathered of this ruddy fruit, it was by that I knew that I had sinned, and then I knew that without a ransom I could not be saved from eternal death. That life lives upon death, and by devouring appetite all things subsist on one another. Henceforth in despair I spend my glowing time. But thou art strong and mighty to bear this self-conviction. Take then, eat thee also of the fruit, and give me proof of life eternal, or I die. Then Los plucked the fruit, and eat, and sat down in despair, and must have given himself to death eternal. But Urthona's spectre, in part mingling with him, comforted him, being a medium between him and Enitharmon. But this union was not to be effected without cares and sorrows and troubles of 6,000 years of self-denial and of bitter contrition. Urthona's spectre, terrified, beheld the spectres of the dead, each male formed without a counterpart, without a concentring vision. The spectre of Urthona wept before Los, saying, I am the cause that this dire state commences. I began the dreadful state of separation, and on my dark head the curse and punishment must fall, unless a way be found to ransom and redeem. But I have thee, my counterpart, vegetating miraculous. These spectres have no counterparts, therefore they raven without the food of life. Let us create them counterparts, for without a created body the spectre is eternal death. Los trembling answered, Now I feel the weight of stern repentance. Tremble not so, my Enitharmon, at the awful gates of thy broken heart. I see thee like a shadow, withering as on the outside of existence. But look, behold, take comfort. Turn inwardly thine eyes, and there behold the Lamb of God, clothed in Luva's robes of blood, descending to redeem. The spectre of Urthona, take comfort. O Enitharmon, couldst thou but cease from terror and trembling and affright, when I appear before thee in forgiveness of ancient injuries, why shouldst thou remember and be afraid? I surely have died in pain often enough to convince thy jealousy and fear and terror. Come hither, be patient. Let us converse together, because I also tremble at myself and at all my former life. Enitharmon answered, I behold the Lamb of God descending to meet these spectres of the dead. I therefore fear that he will give to us eternal death, fit punishment for such hideous offenders, uttermost extinction and eternal pain, an ever-dying life of stifling and obstruction, shut out of existence to be a sign and terror to all who behold, lest any should in futurity do as we have done in heaven. Such is our state, nor will the Son of God redeem us, but destroy. So Enitharmon spoke, trembling and in torrents of tears. Los sat in Golgonooza in the gate of Luban, where he had erected many porches, where branched the mysterious tree, where the spectrous dead wail and sighing. Thus he spoke to Enitharmon. Lovely delight of men, Enitharmon, shady refuge from furious war, thy bosom translucent is a soft repose for the weeping souls of those piteous victims of battle. There they sleep in happy obscurity. They feed upon our life. We are the victims. Stern desire I feel to fabricate embodied semblances in which the dead may live before us in our palaces and in our gardens of labor, which now opened within the center, we behold spread abroad to form a world of sacrifice of brothers and sisters and daughters to comfort Orc in his dire sufferings. Look, my fires loom afresh before my face, ascending with delight as in ancient times. Enitharmon spread her beaming locks upon the wind and said, O lovely, terrible Los, wonder of eternity! O Los, my defense and guide, thy works are all my joy, and in thy fires my soul delights. If mild they burn in just proportion, and in secret night and silence build their day, in shadow of soft clouds and dews. Then I can sigh forth on the winds of Golgonooza piteous forms that vanish again into my bosom. But if thou, my Los, wilt in sweet moderated fury fabricate forms sublime such as the piteous spectres may assimilate themselves into, They shall be the ransoms for our souls, that we may live. So Enitharmon spoke, and Los, his hands divine inspired, began to modulate his fires studious. The loud roaring flames he vanquished with the strength of art, bending their iron points and drawing them forth delighted upon the winds of Golgonooza, from out the ranks of Urizen's war and from the fiery lake of Orc, bending down as the binder of the sheaves follows the reaper, in both arms embracing the furious raging flames. Los drew them further out of the depths, planting his right foot firm upon the iron crag of Urizen, then springing up aloft into the heavens of Enitharmon in a mighty circle. And first he drew a line upon the walls of shining heaven, and Enitharmon tinctured it with beams of blushing love. It remained permanent, a lovely form inspired, divinely human, dividing into just proportions. Los unwearied labored the immortal lines upon the heavens, till a sighs of love sweet Enitharmon, mild, entranced, breathed forth upon the wind the spectre's stead. Weeping, the spectres viewed the immortal works of Los, assimilating to those forms embodied and lovely in youth and beauty in the arms of Enitharmon, mild reposing. First Rintra and then Palamabron, drawn out from the ranks of war, in infant innocence reposed on Enitharmon's bosom. Orc was comforted in the deeps, his soul revived in them. As the eldest brother is the father's image, so Orc became his Los, a father to his brethren, and he joyed in the dark lake, though bound with chains of jealousy and in scales of iron and brass. Los loved them and refused to sacrifice their infant limbs, and Enitharmon's smiles and tears prevailed over self-protection. They rather chose to meet eternal death than to destroy the offspring of their care and pity. Urthona's spectre was comforted, but Tharmas most rejoiced in hope of Enion's return, for he beheld new female forms borne forth upon the air, who wove soft silken veils of covering, in sweet raptured trance, mortal and not as Enitharmon, without a covering veil. First his immortal spirit drew Urizen's shadow away from out the ranks of war, separating him in sunder, leaving his spectre's form which could not be drawn away. Then he divided Theriel, the eldest of Urizen's sons. Urizen became Rintra, Theriel became Palamabron, thus dividing the powers of every warrior. Startled was Los. He found his enemy Urizen now in his hands. He wondered that he felt love and not hate. His whole soul loved him. He beheld him an infant, lovely breathed from Enitharmon. He trembled within himself. End of the 7th night.